Proverbs speaks of wisdom, words that guide the heart and steady the hand. It reminds us that wealth is fleeting, but wisdom endures. Generosity enriches the soul, and stewardship honors the Lord. From the dangers of greed to the blessings of giving, these ancient truths illuminate a path of freedom and purpose. This is MoneyWise, discovering God's wisdom for every penny, every choice, every heart.
It's good to have you here in the room, and those who join us online, glad that you're with us today. Let me tell you about an experience I had about 15 years ago, just under 15 years ago. It was April 2010. My wife and I were in Boston, Massachusetts for an event. My friend Gary Thomas and his wife Lisa were there for the same event, and so we were able to connect and have some meals together, and it was great. While we were at a restaurant for dinner one night, we were actually at a restaurant that was owned by some friends of theirs, and they introduced us to their friends, and it was great to meet Doug and Julie, the people who live in Boston, knew Gary and Lisa well. So we were sitting there talking, having a great dinner, and just kind of curious about Doug and Julie, get to know their story, business owners there in Boston. And in the course of the conversation, it came out that while Doug was a student at MIT, which is an educational place that I did not apply for. While he was a student in the late 70s, early 80s, simultaneously getting his bachelor's and his master's at the same time to be completed in 1981, he never actually finished because he got distracted from doing his dissertation because he and some of his roommates began to create a game, a video game. It's a game you may have heard of, Ms. Pac-Man. So I'm sitting at dinner with the creator of Ms. Pac-Man. It's a pretty amazing thought on this one. He's done pretty well, didn't need to finish that dissertation. And so we were talking, and as we were talking, it came out that he had another friend that they had met because his other friend was wanting to develop a video game, but he played a different game as well. His name was Curt Schilling, who had been a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. And so over the time, this conversation came out that when Curt Schilling, in his last contract negotiation with the Boston Red Sox, he had written into that contract that he would receive lifetime season tickets to Fenway Park. Well, after, I think it was 2007 was his last year with the Red Sox, and then he moved away, but he still had these season tickets. So he gave them to his friend Doug to steward, to go to as many games as he wanted to, and to give them away. Just don't ever sell them, just give them. And so Doug said, Bob, would you and Doreen like to go to a Red Sox game? It was a bit surreal thinking that we would be sitting in Curt Schilling's season tickets given to us by the creator of Ms. Pac-Man. So I said, sure, we'll go. And so we went to Fenway Park. Fenway Park is absolutely historic. It's the oldest active ballpark in the major leagues now. It was built originally in 1912. You walk into this place and it just oozes history. Baseball history is amazing. So we're going in this surreal experience, and we find these seats, Curt Schilling's season ticket seats, and we're getting ready to sit down, and then I saw it. I had heard about it. I had read about it. I had seen pictures of it, but I'd never experienced it. I saw it. This is what I saw. Some of you know what that is? The green monster. The green monster. There it is, silently towering, 37 feet, 2 inches tall in the left field. This left field fence that has been the bane of every right-handed slugger that ever went into a batter's box in Fenway Park. This giant green monster has stolen the potential of what could have been on so many swings, robbed the joy of what should have been. The green monster just sat there destroying dreams. The reason I tell you this is because there's another green monster. And likewise, this green monster silently robs the potential of what could have been, steals the joy of what should have been. And what makes it even more insidious is that while at Fenway Park you can see the green monster, this green monster has gone into cloak mode. It's invisible. We don't even see it. And yet all of us deal with it. The green monster that I want to talk about today, I want us to identify it. I want us to figure out how to slay it. The green monster is greed. Greed. One of what the church fathers would say was one of the 7 deadly sins. It says greed. Now, this is the final week in our series, MoneyWise. We've been looking at issues of money and finances, and we've been looking at the wisdom of Solomon, primarily out of the book of Proverbs, and we will do that yet again today. But in addition to Solomon out of Proverbs, we're going to look at some of his wisdom regarding this green monster that comes out of another book that he wrote, Ecclesiastes. And we're going to look at something that the Apostle Paul said about this green monster. And while we're at it, we're going to look at what Jesus had to say, and we might even check in with Will Smith and Jim Carrey. But we're going to primarily start off with what Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, the wealthiest man of his day, said about this. He writes these words in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 27. A greedy man brings trouble to his family. Now, when you read that phrase, probably 2 thoughts come to your mind. First thought is, you've seen that. You've seen someone, man or woman, who's been greedy and it's brought about destruction for those around. Maybe you grew up in a home with a parent who is greedy and you know the fallout that you got because of that. Maybe you've had a friend that took some ill-advised risks because of greed, began to push the boundaries of ethics and morals and law and what was legal because of greed, maybe extended too far because of greed, and you have seen this. You would say, that's right. The second thought that goes through your mind right now is, glad he's not talking about me today. Because we don't see greed. Greed is real obvious in others, but we can be oblivious when the green monster has gotten a hold of us. See, it's interesting, as a pastor, over the years, I've had people come to me and say, Pastor Bob, I'm just telling you, I have an anger issue. I mean, I blow up and then I feel horrible. I deal with anger. I've had people that have come to me and said, listen, it's a lust thing. I struggle with this, and some of the stuff I look at and my thoughts, I deal with lust. I've had people come to me and they say, I'm not proud of this, but I deal with pride. And so it's all this stuff. You know what I rarely ever hear? I don't know if I've ever heard someone say, Pastor Bob, I'm just so greedy. We don't say that because we don't think we are. And sometimes this green monster maybe has its talons dug into us and we don't even realize it. We're oblivious to it. And like an undertow in an ocean, it begins to suck us away and take us out, and we don't even realize it's happening to us. In the book Enemies of the Heart, in the chapter on greed, the author points out that one of the things that makes greed so insidious, so hard to recognize, is that in our own self-deception, we mask greed actually as a virtue. We'll say something like this. I'm not greedy. I'm responsible. Because responsibility is good. I mean, I preached about that in this series. I'm not greedy. I'm frugal. And I preached about that's a good thing. I'm not greedy. I'm careful. I'm not greedy. I'm a planner. I'm not greedy. I'm just preparing to make sure. And all those things are good. They're virtues. And sometimes there may be an element of truth to that. But what we don't realize is that behind that, lurking silently, is a green monster. The Apostle Paul writes to his young protege, Timothy. He gives this really graphic picture of greed. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, he writes these words, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. I mean, that's some pretty harsh words there. This temptation, the trap, foolish desires, ruin and destruction. He continues on, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The love of money, the green monster. And here's the truth. This is not about an amount of money. Because there are extremely wealthy people who have the love of money, and there are people who don't have a penny to their name, they're in debt, they are completely poor and have the love of money. It's not about an amount. It's about a posture of the heart. It's about the relationship with this. And he says, and when that love of money begins to take over, it begins to take you down these paths to ruin and destruction. When I read this, the best picture of this to me that comes with, for those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, this is your moment. The best picture of this is Gollum, isn't it? Gollum, who was once an adorable little hobbit, but my precious, the one ring and the love for that ring. It creates this hideous creature of self-loathing and love and all this stuff of what he's become because of this. And because of the greed in the green monster, the consumer becomes consumed, that it just overtakes their entire life. Now, in the first week of the series, Pastor Steve talked about contentment, and this kind of comes back and ties in with that. But Solomon is writing some wisdom. Remember, Solomon has this wisdom that's given from the Lord. He has some experiences from his own life. He has some insights that he's just got, and then he's got some observations of just generally watching how people do life. And in addition to that, he's had his fair share of wealth. In fact, in the book of Ecclesiastes, which as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, he wrote probably toward the end of his life, he said this about his money, his wealth, and all of the things that it afforded him, the pleasures, the experiences, the accumulations. He said, I denied myself nothing that my eyes desired. Whatever I wanted, I just bought it. I got it. I experienced it. I had it. I refused my heart no pleasure whatsoever. And he just begins to talk about all the things that he's experienced, all the things that he's done, all the things that he's had, all the things that he's acquired, all of these things. And at the end of it, he says, and here's my conclusion. It's meaningless. I mean, it was fun for what it was, but it overpromised and underdelivered every single time. It was meaningless. My great-grandfather, and I don't have time for this story, but he was, he was a moonshiner, shot his partner and killed him, went to prison. But other than that, pretty good guy. He also was really into greyhounds. And I'm not into any of those things. But what I understand, a greyhound at the greyhound races chases a mechanical rabbit because it's like it thinks if I can get that rabbit, it's everything I've ever desired. What I understand is, if in greyhound races, a greyhound actually ever catches the mechanical rabbit, it'll never race again. Because it discovered that what he thought would have so much fulfillment was just this white fluffy doll on an arm. Now here's the issue. Greyhounds are smarter than us. Because we will chase, and get it like, oh. And instead of saying, well, that was dumb, let's not do that anymore, we see another mechanical rabbit, and we chase, and we get it. Oh. And we just keep doing this. And Solomon says, I chased all the mechanical rabbits, I caught them all. And over again, I was disappointed. And then he would write these words in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. We believe this concept that our happiness is in direct correlation with the amount of money that we have. And to a certain degree, there is some truth to that. But then there are so many studies that show there's a point of the law of diminishing returns that actually sometime the level of happiness stops even when the money and accumulation continues up. In fact, sometimes the complexity that comes with this causes some of the happiness to go down. Or if I just had money, all of my problems would be solved. Will Smith, I told you we might talk about him. Will Smith said that when he was poor and depressed, he had hope because he kept telling himself, if I can get more money, all of my problems will be taken care of. And then he says, when I got wealthy and was still depressed, I no longer had hope because my narrative didn't work anymore. Jim Carrey has been known for this line. He said, I wish everybody could get rich and famous so they would see that it answers absolutely nothing. And some of you are saying, I'd like to try that. I don't want to take Jim's word for it. All righty then, let me try that out myself. Jesus said it's the deception of wealth, that attraction for other things that can lead us away, this inadequacy. I've got to get more, and I've got to keep trying, and I've got to keep pursuing. I've got to keep chasing that rabbit. Here's an interesting thing. There's a man named Morgan Housel. He wrote the book, The Psychology of Money. I listened to a podcast about a month ago with him on it, and he was talking about the psychology of money and happiness. This was a fascinating insight. He said what is really good for us as a macro level, as a society, is detrimental for us on an individual level. Here's what he would say. That inadequacy, that chasing for more, that is so good for us as a culture, as a society. That's what allows us to have medical breakthroughs, technological advances, economic growth. It's just we need more, we need better, we need to grow. That's fantastic for us as a culture, as a society. But when that drives us as an individual, it is detrimental. I've got to get more. I've got to do more. I've got to improve to the point where we will sacrifice family, friends, health, even our very faith, our ethics, our integrity to go after that. Good for us as a society. Really bad for us as individuals. What did Jesus say? What is the profit of man? To gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul. Jesus said this in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Then he said to them, watch out. But he doesn't stop there. He gives a double warning. Be on your guard. Like to double this up. Not just watch out, but watch out and be on your guard. Watch out and be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Why would Jesus do the double warning on the front end? Maybe because it's so subtle. Maybe because we don't recognize it. Maybe because he says, I really want you to be aware because you're going to quickly dismiss it saying, this isn't applied to me. He says, no, slow down. Watch out and be very cautious. Be aware of these things. And then what's amazing is when he says, against all kinds of greed. That apparently it's not one size fits all. Apparently, greed manifests itself in different ways, at different times, in different lives. And maybe that's why we need to be so cautious. We need to watch out because just when we think, well, I've got the green monster slayed, then there's a new green monster over here that said, but I thought I took care of that. And he says, no, there's all kinds. Because man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. There's more to life than just getting more. John Cheever said, he said that the main emotion that the American adult experiences, the American adult that has experienced wealth, education, and culture, the main emotion is disappointment. Disappointment. I mean, compared to the rest of the world, compared to human history, our life expectancy, what we have, I mean, the kind of lifestyles, even the poorest among us, the lifestyle that we live throughout human history and throughout the world, people would have done anything to have this, and yet we're disappointed because we think that's going to be it. Greed shows up in different ways. One of the ways is fear. Fear fuels a scarcity mentality. We say, well, okay, I'm being cautious, I'm preparing. Yeah. But when we start saying, well, what if, and that fear causes us to start holding on to things and grasping things and not letting go of anything. And what if the economy turns? And what if I can't make this money next year? And what if this happens? And what if there's a crisis? And what if all these what ifs? And it gives this scarcity mentality where we start holding on to things. You want to see a really bad case in point on this one? 2020 toilet paper. It happened, didn't it? This fear. Forget COVID and grandma dying, and I got to have toilet paper. I'm not going back to the Sears catalog, never again. And so people start buying these cases of toilet paper and won't share it with anybody. And they come to the church and steal it out of our bathrooms because it's going to happen. And we do this. And we're afraid and we hold on to these things. And we become misers. And let me remind you that miser is the root word of miserable. So Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes 5:13, I've seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner. This fear, I've got to keep this, I've got to hold on to this, I can't share this, I've got to hold on to it. And we enter into this relationship with our money, with our finances, like this covenant relationship. Ah, my precious. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, till death do us part. And you know what? There will come a day when you will die and you will part. But it's this insidious green monster. Now, aren't you glad you came to church today? But here's the good news, is that there's a remedy. There's an antidote. There's a silver bullet. There is a kryptonite that brings this green monster to its knees, that breaks its back and makes it as gentle as a dove. And I want to spend some time talking about this antidote to greed, the remedy to greed, the thing that will slay the green monster. It's one word: generosity. Generosity will destroy the green monster. Now, if right now in your mind you're going, oh, here we go again, you know what? That just may be the voice of a green monster that's got a hold of you. And if you're saying, well, didn't we talk about that last week? Yeah, not really. Last week we talked about honoring God. Today we're talking about generosity. Let me give you a definition for generosity. Generosity is the virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. I'll read it again. The virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. I didn't make that one up. I felt like it's a great definition. That actually came out of this book called The Paradox of Generosity. This is not a faith-based book. Interesting book, fantastic book, by the way. I'm not suggesting that you should read it or buy it. But the book was written by a professor and a doctoral candidate from the University of Notre Dame. It wasn't just their opinions and their ideas. It was the culmination of a 5-year multidisciplinary study called the Science of Generosity Initiative. For 5 years, thousands of interviews across all kinds of social economic things here in the United States. And they wrote this book, The Paradox of Generosity. And it was written kind of on an academic level, so there's a lot of charts, a lot of data to back up their findings. But there's also some stories that make it actually a bit readable. Let me save you some money and some time. Let me give you the summary of this entire book. That way you don't have to read it. But this was their findings, 5 years, thousands of interviews. Here's what they came up with. This is the bottom line. And I don't think there was any pun intended on this one, but maybe so. The wealth of evidence. Maybe there was pun intended, I don't know. But the wealth of evidence reveals a consistent link between demonstrating generosity and leading a better life. More generous people are happier, suffer fewer illnesses and injuries, live with a greater sense of purpose, and experience less depression. That was the result of their finding after 5 years, thousands of interviews, observing. And they said, you know what the key to a better life is? It's generosity. And maybe old Solomon actually knew what he was talking about. In Proverbs 22:9, he writes these words: a generous man will himself be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. A generous man. That seems like the paradox is this, that a statement that seems contradictory actually becomes true. Like the generous man will be blessed. No. We think that the path to blessing is that I would get more, that I wouldn't share, that I would acquire for myself, I would experience for myself, I would have for myself, I would get for myself. And he says, no, it's quite the opposite. And remember, Solomon knew that. He had done that road. He'd gone down. He had denied himself no pleasure, no desire. He had brought it all in for himself. He says that was not the answer. And the verse that is kind of the key for this whole talk today is found in Proverbs chapter 11, verses 24 and 25, when he writes this paradoxical statement that has been proven true over and over again. One man gives freely Paradox, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. Solomon would probably say, guys, you didn't need to take 5 years to figure this out. I told you this 3,000 years ago. If you would have just listened to me. I'm telling you, that's the way it is. Chip Ingram, in his book, The Genius of Generosity, and it kind of summarizes a lot of what we've talked about in this series. He says, to be smart, spend carefully. We've talked about that, live under your means. To be smart, spend carefully. To be wise, save regularly. We talked about that, go to the ant. But to be genius, give extravagantly. You want to be smart? Live under your means, great. You want to be wise? Save and put some away. You want to be genius? Learn to give extravagantly. Years ago, John Wesley preached this sermon, and basically his 3 points were this: earn all you can, save all you can, so that you can give all you can. As we mentioned last week, God is the most extravagant giver there ever has been. Jesus himself said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. It's how he lived. There was a time the Apostle Paul was leaving Asia Minor, was going back to Jerusalem. And he calls all the elders from the church in Ephesus together, and he has this going away parties down on the docks, and they're all going to say goodbye. And they know they'll probably never see him again. A very sad moment. But in this conversation when he's leaving them, it's interesting. He quotes Jesus, a quote that we don't find in the Gospels. So it was either circulated or Paul heard it somewhere. But he quotes Jesus on this. In Acts chapter 20, it says this: remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, most of us have heard that phrase our whole lives. And we can say it and we can quote it, and there's a part of us that kind of believes it, but a part of us that really says, but I really like to receive too. Isn't that the blessing that I really want? And maybe it's a little bit of the green monster saying, yeah, my precious. I referenced this briefly last week. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Probably the most paradoxical statement that Jesus ever made were these words in Luke 17. Whoever tries to keep his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life will preserve it. Doesn't make sense, but it's true. In the book, The Paradox of Generosity, they actually quote Jesus on this one. They use that verse. And then they come to this conclusion. I thought this was interesting. They wrote, many wise writers, philosophers, religious teachers, sages, and mystics have been teaching us about the paradox of generosity for thousands of years. What today's empirical social science research tells us only confirms what we might have known all along had we trusted traditional teachers. So here's the paradox. And maybe this is all you need to hold on to and try to believe it. And even if you don't believe the Bible, there's enough other stuff that would back this up. The paradox is this, that generosity leads to greater happiness. We think, no, holding on to it, getting more of that. No, generosity leads to greater happiness. If that's the paradox, this is the enigma. This is the puzzling mystery. This is the one that doesn't really make sense. The paradox is that generosity leads to greater happiness. The enigma is knowing this, we aren't. That we know that, but we don't pursue that happiness. We know what Solomon said. We know what Paul writes to Timothy. We know what Jesus said, practiced, and modeled. We hear Will Smith and Jim Carrey and the professor from Notre Dame. We know that. And yet we still say, nah, I'm good. I'll keep chasing the mechanical rabbit. That's the blessing. And what we'll find is if we really want to experience the blessed life of generosity, it's not just a one-off event. It's a lifestyle. So, here's how I want us to conclude. So you're saying, this is a short sermon. I am not done yet. I want us to take what we've just heard and what we just learned and put it into practice. Because with generosity, practice makes progress. Okay? So we want to practice this. I want this for all of us. I want us to not just know here, but to discover here and to live out this truth that generosity does lead to a happier life, a healthier life, a better life. That it's not just chasing these rabbits all the time. I don't want you to just walk out of here hearing these words and knowing these things. I want you to practice these things. And because all of the scripture and all the other data demonstrates that when you're generous, you're happier, I want to give you that opportunity. I want you to experience that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a second offering today. Pretty much the response I expected. You're going to thank me for this. Because generosity leads to happen. We're going to do a second offering, and I want all of you to participate in this. Listen, if this is your first time ever at Cornwall and you're going, whoa, yeah, no, I'm serious. I want you involved on this one. And if you're saying, well, wait, hey, I give online. I don't care. I want you involved in this offering. You say, but I already gave the first time they passed by. I don't care. I want everyone. I don't care how old you are. I want everyone to participate. And some of you right now are saying, whew, glad I'm sitting in the back because the ushers always come forward. And by the time they get back, I'm out of here. Oh, no, you aren't. No. Because we're going to reverse this. We're going to start in the back and pass forward. So if that was what you're thinking back there, not happening this time. We're going to start and we're going to, in reverse, do a second offering. But it's a reverse offering, not just in the order of which we send these baskets around. And this is why I want all of you to participate. It's a reverse offering because when the baskets come, they're going to be filled with these envelopes, and I don't want you to put anything in the basket. I want you to take something out of the basket, which some of you do every week anyway. But I want you today, I want you to take something out of the basket. I want you to take an envelope out of the basket. Now listen, hear me out, because last night we had people putting money in the basket. No, you missed the point. Don't put anything in. Take something out. You can take one of these envelopes out. Inside of this envelope are two things. One of them is a $10 bill. Yeah, aren't you glad you didn't go to Christ the King today? Okay. There's a $10 bill in here, and then there's something else I'll tell you about in a minute. This is not your money. This is God's money. And God says, I'm convinced that if you're generous, you'll be happy, so we're going to let you practice generosity with my money. So you're each going to get, and listen, last night we had couples that just took one or families. No, everybody participate. Everybody gets an envelope when these come forward. Now with that, there are a couple of rules that I want to go over with you. The first rule is this: only take one envelope. Only take one envelope. You say, well, yeah, but my son was going to come today and he's not feeling good. I don't care. Well, yeah, but my neighbor, and they would like to be here and maybe this. No, you take one. And a little side note, if you decide to take two, you just remember, you just stole in church of God's money. You're on your own. How many envelopes are you going to take? Okay, some of you, this group over here, ushers, be careful. How many envelopes are you going to take? Thank you. That's the first one. The second rule is this, is to pray for God's direction. To pray to take this envelope, to take this $10 and say, God, this is your money. How would you have me steward this money? See, on the back of it, there are these words, in God we trust. And today God's saying, hey, in you I trust with some of my money. So ask, pray, listen. God, what would you have me do with your money? The third rule is to consider impact expansion. Like, how could $10 make a bigger difference? Now, I'm not talking about going to the casino. I'm not talking about putting this in and seeing if you can get $300 and really make a difference for the kingdom. I'm not talking about buying lottery tickets. What I'm talking about is, what if you and some friends, or you and your small group, or you and your family said, why don't we combine all of our $10? That we can make a bigger difference in an individual's life or an organization. And consider, what if we added some of our own to this as well? What if we said, okay, God, we'll see you and we'll match you or raise you? I don't know. Would you consider? You don't have to. Fourth rule is this. If you've done all that, then steward this and bless. And I'm not going to give you a whole lot of guidelines on what you're supposed to do with God's money. This is not for you. If you say, God told me to just kind of bless myself. No, that's not it. And I know if my brother and I were here as middle schoolers, I'd say, I'll give you mine if you'll bless me with yours. No, that's not the idea. But to give this, and don't give it back to Cornwall. Maybe you would feel prompted to say, you know what? I'm going to combine with some others. I know a single mom that's really struggling. I know a family that's out of work, and we're going to help out. There's an organization, like in Getty or whatever, that helps with sex trafficking victims to get life again. I'm going to give that. I got an email this morning from some people that are here for the first time last night. Said, we're going to combine that. We're giving to the food bank. Whatever it might be. Can I just say one little side note? One of the partners that we have here is with the Lighthouse Mission, who does a holistic approach to not just dealing with symptoms, but dealing with problems. And they would say one of the most unproductive things you could do is to just give cash to someone on the street corner. If you want to buy them a meal, if it's appropriate, you want to take them to coffee and hear their story. But I would caution you against that one. And then the final rule is this, is to share. And that's the other thing that's in this envelope is a little card. And we would like to hear what you did. And you don't have to use the card. You can bring that back, send it back, whatever, over the next few weeks. You can also do this online, stories@cornwallchurch.com. That's all on here. But we want to hear you say, well, isn't that kind of bragging about it? No. In the parable of the steward, the owner says, I want an account of what you did with my money. This is simply saying, what did you do with God's money? So that we can rejoice in how the kingdom was advanced, how God changed our hearts, how we experienced happiness and generosity, how people were blessed. To share that. Okay, those are the rules. 3 more things real quick before I let you start taking envelopes. In every service, there are 1 or 2 envelopes that have a $50 bill in it. Now, when they come by, don't do this. We'll just trust if you get that one, God trusts you even more. And let me just address those of you who are online saying, of all weeks. I want you to participate, and I want to read an email that I got this morning, okay? It's an email I got this morning. We didn't make it to live service tonight. That was Saturday night. As our son has pneumonia. He's 12 years old. We watched online. After the reverse offering, he got up, son, 12-year-old pneumonia son, got up and drifted upstairs while the worship team sang. He came downstairs with a stack of comics and passed them around. When we opened them, each of us found $1 and one had a 5 in it. He put his birthday money in them and told us we had to participate. Online, what's your excuse? Just saying. Final thing is this. Because we're starting from the back, when the basket gets passed and you take out your envelope, then you can stand and we're going to sing. Until then, follow the rules.